So if you guys don't already know, I really love Corvettes. I love my C5 that I have, I love the C6, C7, and I think the new C8 is absolutely insane and super cool. But sometimes GM and their engineering and decision making as a company really makes me want to pull my hair out. In sum, my C5 Corvette has now become a victim to probably one of the most widespread and common problems that the C5 and C6 Corvettes face. And in today's video, I'm going to talk all about it and what my plans are to fix it. So what is this problem I'm referring to exactly? Well, if you're well tuned into the Corvette world, the C5 and C6 Corvettes really have an issue, a very known problem with the harmonic balancers or crank pulley on the engines of these cars. The harmonic balancer pulley on the front of the engines of these cars does, as the name suggests, it balances and dampens the vibrations from the imbalances that a V8 engine naturally has. Now, all cars have a harmonic balancer, but for some reason, the stupid GM design for the LS and LQ, I think even the trucks and SUVs, I think, have this problem to some degree as well. The stupid design on this thing just fails, and it causes all sorts of problems. Essentially, the pulley is comprised of an inner hub and an outer hub, and then in between that is a rubber bushing or gasket material that helps to dampen the vibrations. Well, over time, that gasket material or rubber bushing becomes unseated, and the pulley will start spinning on itself and or walking forward or backwards on the crank of the engine, and either running the pulley into the power steering rack or running the pulley into the timing cover on the engine. So obviously those things are no bueno, and it's really unfortunate because, as I already said, this problem is really widespread. If you watch any video that anybody talks about, like buying tips for a C5 Corvette, they say to look out for the wobble in the harmonic balancer. Now, unfortunately, because I bought this car sight unseen from Montana, I wasn't able to really check into that very much, and it was just part of the risk I took. When I first got the car and started it up, it really wasn't bad, but over the past 2 years, the balancer has developed a lot more serious of a wobble, which I will show you guys in a second. So it's really unfortunate because this problem is really widespread. However, I have not heard of anything that GM has done to take care of this in the form of a recall or TSB, a technical service bulletin that basically then puts it on GM to eat the cost of having to replace these parts that commonly go bad on these cars. And I've even heard that if you were to buy a brand new OEM replacement harmonic balancer today, they still fail or are just as likely to fail as the one that is 20 years old sitting on this car. So I've been aware of this problem as it's developed to get worse and worse over the past, I'd say, 6 months or so, and that's part of the reason why it's delayed me getting it back on the road, because I don't feel comfortable driving it long distances, because basically the symptom is if the balancer gets bad enough in the wobble, it'll start throwing the belt, and if it's really bad, it'll start, really spinning on itself and walking forward or back and damaging either your power steering rack or your timing cover, as I already said. So I definitely don't want that to happen, so I've been really limiting how much I drive it, although part of that has also been me fixing the fender and front end here, so that's really why I haven't been driving it. But now I've basically done months of preparation. I've gotten all the parts and tools that I need to do this job, but I just kind of want to post a video about this to make some of you aware, and if I can get any tips or feedback from anybody who's already done this. But I'm going to show you guys exactly what I'm talking about and all of the parts and tools I have got to do the job. Alright, so let's actually go underneath the hood of the car so you guys can get a better idea of what I'm talking about if you've actually never heard of this problem. Now, like I said, it's a pretty well-known problem in the Corvette world, so most likely if you're into Corvettes or if you've seriously done some research looking at buying one, you'll probably have heard of people saying check your harmonic balancer. So you can see that's the harmonic balancer right there where I'm shining the flashlight and it's blowing it out. So right there is your harmonic balancer. That's the two-piece inner and outer hub balancer design that came stock on this car. And as you can see, the balancer, you know, in super severe cases, the balancer is actually walked enough forward where that slight gap in between the balancer pulley and the power steering rack is no longer there. And you don't want this to walk into the power steering rack, and it'll basically cause you to have to get a replacement one. And then you also don't want it to go backwards into the timing cover of the engine. So luckily this one, and I'll show you guys here in a second when I start up the car, this one has not gotten super severe, but it's definitely developed a noticeable wobble enough to where I want to replace it. A lot of people say that these all inherently have some amount of wobble to them, but this one definitely looks like it's getting to the point where if I just let it go unchecked, it's gonna get really bad. So let me go ahead and start up the car for you guys and try and show you as best I can on camera here what the wobble looks like. So I don't know how well that came across on video. I guess I'll figure this out when I'm editing this video, but I hope that tried to document the amount of wobble that I'm seeing in this car. Now, some people are more conservative than others when it comes to saying, yeah, you should replace it, or no, that's fine, that's kind of normal. I think it's kind of like still okay. I could get away with it, but I'm in the process of rebuilding this car. I just want to get the front end completely situated, and if that means doing the balancer now, I'd rather have to do it now than down the line and have the car go down for weeks at a time again. So one thing that other people do when they're trying to diagnose to see if their balancer is slowly getting worse and worse is they'll actually take a paint pen and draw a line across the outer hub, the I guess rubber bushing, and the inner hub, and if the pulley starts spinning on itself, obviously those points will no longer be aligned. It's similar to like a torque stripe. So you can do that if you're trying to see if your balancer is getting worse and worse. You know, I could mess around and just see, but I'm just going to replace it because I'm already invested this far in. So why is it when the harmonic balancer goes bad on these cars, it's such a big deal? Well, the job of replacing it is really not that hard. You get a puller tool, you pull the old one off, and then some people heat the new one up, or you have an installer tool and you push the new one on, crank the bolt down, boom, you're good to go. Well, with the C5 and C6 Corvettes, because it is a somewhat compact engine bay there, the power steering rack, as you guys probably already saw, sits right in front of the balancer. So for you to be able to get a wrench in there to get on that crank bolt to get it off and torque the new one on, you got to take the power steering rack out, which is a rather involved process. That means undoing tie rod ends, undoing the sway bar, undoing power steering lines, undoing the steering input shaft to the Magnasteer connection. So it's a pretty involved job. So a lot of people hem and haw when these cars have this issue. Now, part of me, I'll be honest with you guys, did consider just taking it to a shop and having them do it so I could have it be done and not have to worry about it. However, the average cost to have this done, just talking kind of labor, is right around $800 to $900, depending on obviously where you take it. If you take it to the dealership, it's going to be way more, versus if you take it to an independent shop, it's going to be probably a little cheaper. But parts and labor included, depending on the quality of balancer you get as the replacement, you're looking at least $1,000, maybe even like $1,200, especially more if you go with the balancer that I ended up getting, which I will talk about in a second. But in the long run, you know, the reason why I bought this car was so that I could learn and challenge myself. If I wanted to just have a nice car that just drives right out of the box, and I have to remind myself of this often, I would have just taken out a loan and bought a really nice Corvette or a C5. But the reason why I bought this one from the insurance auction, where it obviously needed some work and some TLC, was so that I could learn and challenge myself in my hobbies and whatnot. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I have to constantly remind myself, even though how much of a headache it is, I'm going to end up doing this job myself, and I'm going to document as best as I can when I actually do it so that I can share my experience with you guys. It is a well-documented problem. There's many videos on YouTube on how to do this, and that's what I've been watching. So I'm probably not going to do like a step-by-step, but I'm going to do like what I've done in the past with other videos of maintenance, like on my C55 and whatnot, is just share milestones along the way and share my overall experience with like little tips and tricks that I learned personally along the way while doing this job. So being that I chose to do this job myself and that I'm going to save a decent chunk of change by doing it myself, I thought to spend that money and invest in some really cool tools for the garage here. And I just did a video on this. It's the previous video. I bought a set of Quickjacks, and that's going to really allow me to get the car nice high up in the air, not have to do this thing on jack stands, and it'll make the job that much easier and safer as well. You know, jack stands, if you do it right, they're safe, but I still always get a little nervous, especially on this job. You have to drop the subframe a little bit as well. That's another thing that people gripe about. So you can't put the jack stands in the regular spots underneath the front subframe. So this was a perfect opportunity to invest in a nice set of Quickjacks. So now I'm just gonna go over really quick what are the parts and tools I bought that I'm gonna need to do this job. So in the corner over here, these are the Quickjacks that I was just talking about, the Quickjack 7000s that I just bought and set up in my last video. So if you haven't watched that and you're interested, go check that out. These things are awesome. Basically, you put them underneath each side of the car, connect up some quick disconnect hydraulic hoses, plug it into the power unit, which is down there somewhere, and you hit a button and it raises the car 2 feet in the air in a matter of like half a minute. So next on the parts list to do this job is obviously one of the most important parts is the new damper. Now you guys can probably see from the name on the box that I chose to go with the really expensive but at the same time really high quality ATI super damper. Now a lot of people will say this is extreme overkill because I have a stock car, although I will be adding power in the future, but I just figured, and these are rebuildable, I'm gonna go ahead and just, you know, buy once, cry once. I spent the 400 bucks and got this ATI super damper off of Summit Racing, so I know this thing is not going to fail on me and it's going to last a long time, and it's, like I said, rebuildable. The next thing you're going to need is a new crank bolt. So you can definitely go with the OEM torque to yield bolt, but after all the reading and research I've done, a lot of people just say go with the ARP bolt. It's a lot better quality. Got some blue Loctite for the bolts to assemble the balancer. This is another thing, preventative maintenance. This is a front main seal, which when you have the crank pulley off or harmonic balancer off, you're right there at the front main seal, so might as well replace it to do some preventative maintenance. Got my seal puller tool. This is the balancer install tool I got off Summit Racing. So it's literally just a long threaded rod with a special kind of like coupling that allows you to press the damper onto the snout of the crankshaft. And then the other very important tool that will make this job way easier is the Harmonic Balancer removal tool. Now these balancers require a special type of removal tool because they have like grooves in them, so you're in the best of interest to buy the appropriate tool so that it latches onto the balancer properly and you can pull it out with as least amount of headaches as possible. And one of the last few tools I got that I'm going to use during this job is a flywheel locking tool. When you crank and when you loosen and tighten the crank bolt, it has a tendency to want to turn the engine over. So this guy, you have to take the exhaust manifold off and the starter, but you can basically put this where the starter goes and these teeth lock into the flywheel and prevent the engine from turning over when you've got to apply that 240 foot-pounds to torque this new crank bolt down. And the last thing that I'm missing here from my tool and parts arsenal to do this job is just a set of crow's foot wrenches. Crow's foot wrenches are highly recommended to use when you're removing and installing the power steering lines that you have to take off and put on when you take the power steering rack out. Now a lot of people recommend those because you have the least chance of stripping the the pattern on the hardware for the power steering lines. Kind of like a big overview of what the problem is and all of the parts and tools that I purchased to do this job. All said and done, for all the balancer stuff and the hardware and tools that I've gotten so far, not including the corrosive wrenches, I think I was right about 650 bucks, somewhere around there. But obviously the Quickjacks were like 1,500, so that also doesn't play into it. So you can most certainly do this with jack stands, but it's just going to obviously be way easier. So if you wrench a lot and you're already considering getting some Quickjacks and you got a project or a task like this to do, perfect opportunity to invest in some nice tools. So like I said at the beginning of the video, I've been doing a ton of research over the past 2 months of all the parts and things you need to do to properly do this job so that it obviously doesn't happen again. I've been watching tons of YouTube videos and reading a bunch of forum posts. Someone actually was nice enough to post a very detailed step-by-step how-to on the Corvette forum on how to do this job and all of the little tips that he learned. So I'm also taking notes from all the videos I've learned as well, and I plan on doing this job in a few weekends because I got a few things coming up. So when I do that, I'll make sure I document as much as I can so I can share my experience with you guys. It's really unfortunate that GM has just kind of like let this be swept under the rug and not address it, because it is a very widespread problem across the whole Corvette, C5 and C6 platforms, and I think, like I said, even the truck and SUV engines that are similar LS style engines as well. So if you guys are watching this and you have to do this same job in the future, or you've already done this, please feel free to leave a comment below, give me some tips and tricks or some advice on if you've already done it, and I'd greatly appreciate that, or others watching this video might benefit from it as well. So thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you stay tuned for this to come, because it's going to be a big task. I hope to knock it out in about 2 to 3 days if I've got all the tools and parts that I need. But once I get that done, this car is that much closer to getting back on the road so I can really enjoy this thing. And I also have some other parts that I still have not installed on the car yet that will make this car that much more fun and exciting to drive. So again, thank you guys all so much for watching. If you haven't already, check out my Etsy store, link in the description for that if you're interested in building a custom homemade go-kart. I have the plans and blueprints for that for sale that I've designed myself. If you want to see my go-kart content, I've got a whole playlist dedicated to my go-kart build on my channel. And other than that, thank you guys so much for watching and supporting the channel. Give the video a thumbs up, that helps the video a lot. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next one.